Hello. This talk was prepared for the 16th International Conference on Religion and Spirituality and Society, bringing my views about entheogens and the history of religions, contemporary healing, and human evolution. Contemporary research on psychedelics has brought us to a new encounter between the truth claims of science and religion. Normally, we think of science as providing us with empirical, true, objective knowledge, and religion just being arbitrary cultural beliefs. But the study of traditional and theogenic healing practices brings us to a new perspective, one in which we can see that traditional religious practices also have some very substantial objective truth value that I will argue is relevant to the contemporary psychedelic renaissance. Now that we find that these substances are not just the tools of the devil, as the conquistadors told us, but rather that they're very potent medicines, we're in a perspective to reevaluate the significance of the use of traditional and theogenic healing practices. So in this talk, I'm going to argue that yes, religion can inform science if we take cross-cultural and evolutionary perspectives on the use of these types of healing traditions. And what we're going to see is that cultures around the world have discovered something empirical about the use of these substances and how to optimize their use in ways that are now also applicable to our postmodern world. So when we look around the world, what we see is that psychedelics had widespread use in the past. And when we look at it from an evolutionary perspective in terms of the consumption of mushrooms, there's substantial evidence that not only our own ancestors, foraging societies, hominids, and perhaps even primates were involved in the consumption of mushrooms. And at some point, some of our ancestors began to consume psilocybin containing mushrooms. This was inevitable because the many genera with psilocybin are found in most ecozones of the world. Pretty much everything except the Antarctic regions have and Arctic regions have substantial presence of mushrooms that can alter consciousness. And the use of these substances across cultures is documented in the past. For instance, not only do we have Amanita species found worldwide, but they're represented in rock arts, as illustrated with the kind of conical caps and the half cut image of the Amanita muscaria here on the right. There's also within the Siberian region various psilocybin containing species. Bronze Age Europe has interesting depictions of what is arguably the representation of mushrooms on the heads of people where they have their most profound effects. Spain has rock art that has been identified down to the specific Psilocybe hispanica based upon some of the key diagnostic features. In Algeria, we have the famous rock art in the bee shaman with the mushrooms depicted all over the body as well as on the head and coming in and out of the heads. Egypt arguably has representations of psilocybe mushrooms in some of their most significant artifacts. Maya and Guatemala have the famous mushroom stones, including ceramic depictions of Amanita, and the Mesoamerican mushroom stones are also widely recognized as being part of prehistoric and theogenic traditions. These are also found across the Americas. In Colombia, the National Museum has significant art pieces reflecting mushrooms. Argentina has mushroom artifacts that are widely distributed. And even here in Peru, the famous Peruvian mushroom stones that may have been used for crushing the juice out of mushrooms. So this use of entheogenic mushrooms is not just found in the simple forager societies, but is widespread in the past. And in this issue of psychedelics and prehistory and world religions from the Journal of Psychedelic Studies, 14 contributors outline evidence for the use of entheogens in prehistory and in world religions. For instance, we have an article there about the mushroom stones of India, well formed in terms of the caps representing mushrooms. There's also evidence of widespread location of mushrooms within the Khajuraho temples of India, where some of the depictions, for instance, clearly show the white specks on the caps of the mushroom depictions in the famous temples of Khajuraho. There's also many other depictions there, including the blue spots on the stem of one of the mushrooms, diagnostic feature of psilocybin, as well as many of the other kinds of features found in some psilocybin mushrooms, such as the gregarious formation shown on the right-hand side here. Christianity also has long-standing evidence of the incorporation of entheogens. The sacred mushroom and the cross by Allegro first brought this to worldwide attention, alleging that Amanita was part of pre-Christian cults that were continued in Christianity. And Jerry and Julie Brown's book, The Psychedelic Gospels, shows that there's much evidence for the use of hallucinogenic mushrooms within the early Christian traditions. The Plaincourt fresco in France, called The Temptation in the Garden of Eden, clearly depicts a Amanita mushroom. The conversion of Saint Eustache ceramic depiction in the Chartres Cathedral in France shows what are arguably Amanita species as well as other mushroom species. Other Christian art shows what is probably other species of entheogenic psilocybin mushrooms. The Transfiguration of Christ in St. Michael's Church in Germany shows mushrooms over the heads of people. And the great Canterbury Psalter in Canterbury Cathedral, England, shows what may well be the Clavicus purpura, the ergot fungi that is shown here on the far right in comparison to one of the images off of the crystal glass. So why is entheogenic use transcultural? Why is the use of psychedelics transcultural? Well, the simple answer is that their pharmacological effects produce mystical experiences, and the research by Roland Griffiths and his colleagues has shown that these are not just expectation effects, but in carefully controlled clinical studies, psilocybin can occasion mystical type experiences. More than 60%, around 2/3 of all of their participants in their studies had mystical experiences as measured by the mystical experiences questionnaire. And these experiences were among the most significant experiences of their entire life and had sustained spiritual significance. So we have the widespread use of psychedelics in cultures around the world because these substances objectively produce mystical and spiritual experiences. But why do the 5-HT psychedelics produce mystical experiences? Well, basically because the psychedelic active ingredient 5-HT2A, referring to a specific serotonin receptor, is very close to the chemical structural form of serotonin, and it interacts directly with a wide range of not only serotonergic receptors, but other kinds of neurotransmitters as well, that we're enhancing what is arguably the most important of the neurotransmitter systems in our brain, the serotonergic system. And I will produce here evidence that the psychedelic serotonergic mechanisms are not only, engaged in transmission, but perhaps even more importantly, they're engaged in neuromodulation. That is to say, serotonin is capable of modulating the activity of other kinds of receptors and receptor systems, and that they have a wide variety of functions, and ultimately they have a potential to be instrumentalized, to use for positive effects. And I'll eventually come to talk about the contemporary clinical research that shows a wide range of psychosocial effects of psilocybin and other 5-HT2A psychedelics that explains why they were so widely adapted in religious experiences and cultural traditions. So serotonin neuromodulates just about all the major functions of our body, from sleep and arousal, thermoregulation, cardiovascular functions, sensory processing, motor activity, our hormones, learning and memory processes, cognition, decision making. Indeed, serotonin is one of the major modulatory systems affecting what has been called the triune brain, the relationship between our deep ancient reptilian-like survival mechanisms, our mammalian emotional systems, and our more highly developed frontal capacities for information processing. Also, we see here the hyperassociative capacity of the psychedelics. You can probably figure out which one is the diagram showing connectivity of your brain on psychedelics. This hyperconnectivity pattern is one of the reasons why I have proposed that psychedelics be understood as psychointegrators that integrate information from diverse parts of the brain that normally don't communicate. And I think this is part of the spiritual experience, this thing, since that all things are connected. The adaptive effects of 5-HT2A stimulation are pretty widespread. Neurogenesis, the creation of new neural systems, the elevated cortical plasticity, enhanced associative learning, elevated capacity for mediating stress, increasing patience, coping, creativity, sociability, and ultimately an enhanced ability to resolve problems with active strategies rather than merely enduring the problems. So what were the adaptations that human cultures have made of these potentials? Richard Evans Solters and I put together an article about the therapeutic properties, focusing more narrowly on that one area, and find an amazing range of uses of these substances. In ayahuasca, we see the range of spiritual, physical, emotional, and mental healing, spiritual things such as susto and soul loss, resolving social and interpersonal conflicts, treating people for social incompetence and sexual dysfunction, and dealing with a wide range of emotional conditions from stress and fear and trauma to anger and resentment. Also used for integration within the cultural group and for acculturation to change. The Cactaceae species have a wide variety of supernatural uses for sorcery and witchcraft, purification, but also a wide range of social issues, resolving problems and conflicts, restoring equilibrium, giving people the incentive to work and change, acquiring a career and knowledge, getting guidance, dealing with childbirth and fertility problems, problems of acculturation, addiction, and identity. Convolvulaceae, the Ipomea species, morning glories, has diverse spiritual healing uses, as well as a wide variety of physical illnesses from fevers and infections and swellings to rheumatism, diabetes, hypertension, fatigue, rheumatism, kidney ailments, sexual dysfunction, and again, labor and delivery issues. Psilocybin use, similarly in Mesoamerica, was for spiritual problems, but also for physical and social and emotional conditions, finding the cause of illness, finding lost animals, identifying thieves, and for spiritual conditions, for sorcery, for spirit obsessions, hexes to purify, social conditions such as resolving disputes, and physical illnesses, including chills and fevers and headaches and infections. The snuffs, similarly, are used for shamanic purposes as well as physical problems, mouth sores, stomach problems, wounds, intestinal worms, bladder problems, to facilitate childbirth again. Indeed, the Anadenthera snuffs, similarly, wide variety of shamanic activities, but also for battle and warfare, for ancestor worship, harvest activities, and sorcery. So these diverse uses sort of suggest a placebo effect. But could these be physiological effects as well? What we know about serotonin and its diverse effects suggests that it can, in fact, facilitate a wide variety of kinds of changes and therapeutic effects, beginning with its effects on neuroplasticity, as well as personal, social, and cognitive effects. So psychedelics are psychoplastogens. They enhance structural and functional neuroplasticity across the levels of the brain, from neurogenesis to re-stimulating neural pathways, reconfiguring neural networks, and producing long-lasting neural changes that include an enhanced sensitivity to environmental conditions, an enhanced learning, reduced um, responses to challenging problems, and finding new behavioral adaptations through cognitive flexibility. Indeed, there's suggestions that they were involved in a wide variety of evolutionary adaptations. So Rodriguez Arce and I looked at the role of psychedelics in possible evolutionary scenarios and reviewed the clinical research to show exactly why it would have been that psychedelics would have facilitated our deep human evolution. They enhance sociality. They make us more social approach and engage with interactions, reducing fear responses and senses of self-exclusion. They enhance emotional self-control, tolerance of others, pro-social attitudes, increasing extroversion and openness in ways that enable us to better relate to others and to have lasting altruistic effects. Cognitive effects include a wide variety of enhancement of information integration, enhanced mental representation, creating unusual, unconventional connections that enhance creativity, provide an impetus for changing perspectives that improve problem solving, enhancing insight and awareness. I would say that in general, the effects of psychedelics on cognition is to improve cognition, to enhance psychointegration, the psychointegration of behavioral, emotional, and cognitive levels of the brain. So instead of the stoned ape hypothesis, we ought to entertain that psilocybin was a key element in producing the enlightened ape. How were these substances and their effects managed by culture? They were managed by an adaptation based on the evolved psychology of ritual and setting. And I've looked at this more extensively in these earlier articles, as well as in the Entheogenic Healing book. Drug instrumentalization is a widely used concept in evolutionary psychology that talks about the adaptive benefits of using drugs. Amplifying environmental connection was one of the things that psilocybin would have done, the pro-sociality and improved cognition, enhancing group decision making, and of course, it led to collective ritual and religious activities that were designed to help manage psychological distress and to treat health problems. In entheogenic therapy, they were used in a variety of different ways, and the Handbook of Entheogenic Healing was used as the basis for my cross-cultural analyses in terms of how were cultures using these substances in terms of their preparation. What kind of ritual context did they have? What kind of ritual techniques did they use? What were the functions of the visions? What healing processes and integration? And I'll briefly overview some of these here to emphasize the common patterns. For instance, preparation, purification, steam bath, and abstaining from sex and engaging in fasting, preparing for a night-long ceremony in nature with family groups and community groups, using songs as a sacred language, as well as chanting, whistling, dancing, and percussion. The visions providing an understanding of the mistakes that led to a disrupted life, the illnesses, and how the person could restore their balance, health, and well-being through responding to the information provided. During the integration period, seclusion from others, no sex or alcohol, and focusing upon the commitment to change behaviors. The peyote of the Wisharico Wisho, led by the Maracache singers. This begins with an arduous pilgrimage with fasting, reduced food consumption, no sex. Eventually, a nighttime collective ritual in nature using songs, drumming, and dancing. The visions provide the self-diagnosis, and the integration on the journey home included paying attention to additional information from the dreams and engaging in purification rituals to untie the souls of the group members that were bound together for the journey when they reached home. The morning glory, sexual abstinence, and a special diet required for eventually a ceremony at nighttime in darkness with the family and community, and often a group of fasters who were paid to accompany the patient. The visions are used to see the circumstances that caused the problem and how to heal it. And the seeds we're seeing as making the person speak, saying what the cause of the problems were, revealing what the dreams showed about the circumstances. The integration period focused on dreams and dieting, no sex, avoiding strangers, and engaging in self-healing through a focus on the vision and an awareness of what it was that caused the problems in the first place. The ayahuasca traditions, we have not only these three articles in the book, including one here by Pedro Favaron and Shannon Benso, looking at the indigenous Shipibo Conibo nations, but also others that have to do with more contemporary ayahuasca traditions. The Yahe and the Commensa healing practices, again, diet, avoiding alcohol and sex, preparing oneself mentally, physically, and emotionally, seeking balance before the ceremony, which was a nighttime ritual with family and community, where the techniques thought to be important to healing were not just the yahe, as they call ayahuasca, the purging, but the music, the songs, the incantations, and prayers. And the visions were thought to reveal the cause of illness and, more importantly, what changes were necessary for cure. The integration period focused on the importance of avoiding sex, alcohol, conflicted relationships, stay at home. Figure out what you need to change about your behavior and interpersonal relations. The Metayabu has an interesting set of practices here with the Shipibo Konibo Nation in which only the healer takes the ayahuasca, and both the healer and the patients are expected to engage in sexual abstinence, special diet, cleans negative emotions, and the healing techniques were thought to involve the songs. They came from the ayahuasca, but the songs producing the healing energies, providing the medicinal songs, and providing the visions that were interpreted through the Metayabu's dreams in order to understand how to help the person realign their life course, calming the body. But healing was also in part engendered by the relationship with the healer, the bond of trust, the faith, but also the commitment to change behavior, to change the ignorant things that the person did that caused the illness. In essence, changing one's behavior, amending one's faults. Vegetalismo here in Peru, fasting, the famous cleansing fasting diets, sexual abstinence, purifying with the special plant diets, overnight ceremony with the group in which the songs and purification and tobacco, along with the ayahuasca, were thought to be an important part of the healing processes. The visions were not only there to strengthen and protect the person, but more importantly, to enhance the intuition in a way that would reveal the causes of illness. Integration period involved sexual abstinence, relying upon the dreams to reveal the lessons that were important to changing emotions, self-perceptions, and social relationships that were part of illness. So what we see here across these and many other entheogenic healing practices is a set of commonalities that focus on the preparation involving abstinence and diet, nighttime communal ritual relations, rituals that have an important focus on mimetic activities, the visions that are revelatory in terms of the causes of illness, and the integration processes that focus on a variety of restrictions, including sexual abstinence. I propose that the commonalities in entheogenic healing practices that we see across cultures correspond directly to aspects of our evolved psychology of ritual healing, which is to say, effects on the 5-HT2A that come from sexual abstinence and diet, priming hormone systems, social integration processes and access to dreams that come from the overnight rituals, the effects of mimesis on the endorphins and other endogenous neurotransmitters and our emotions, the roles of the visions in getting access to songs and to dream space, dream processes, and the endogenous healing processes that include utilizing the dreams as diagnosis and the abstinence as a way of stabilizing inhibitory control. So we have a psychopharmacology of the innate set and setting. I'll try to briefly explain why these are important. Fasting and abstinence are well recognized as inducing altered states of consciousness, and they also constitute stressors that further stimulate the serotonergic system, particularly the 5-HT2A system and its adaptive responses. Fasting also induces hormone release, ghrelin. This produces a shift in autonomic regulation and balance to enhance the excitatory functions and reduce inhibitory regulation. So the interoceptive, motivational, and excitatory signaling from the hypothalamus and mesolimbic systems is enhanced, providing a greater emotional intensity and enhanced somatic responses. So Particularly fasting through stimulating ghrelin potentiates psychedelic effects. The hominid ritualizations, maximal displays exhibited by chimpanzees, are also nighttime group chorusings of the entire group involving drumming, and these mimetic activities are recognized as releasing endogenous opioids, responding in ways that remove tension, produce emotional synchrony, and provide for the incorporation of dreams from the overnight ceremony. We recognize dreams as an information integration and consolidation process. We can see why it's important to do the ceremonies overnight, where we get this enhanced technology of dreaming to improve the capacity of the psychedelics to be integrated. Mimesis is core to human evolution and shamanic development. Mimesis is imitation, expressed in music and song and dance, and it's also a social modulation technology. It uses a neural technology or bodily kinesthetic intelligence that not only evokes the endogenous opioids, but stimulates the other major neurotransmitter systems, including dopamine and serotonin, and it invokes endogenous emotional states such as love. It provides for the expression of a pre-reflective primitive level of social and bodily self and its core affective information and intelligence in a way that makes our unconscious emotional dynamics more accessible. The visions, what have been called hallucinations, need to be understood as a form of symbolic cognition, which is to say that this is primary process visual symbolization. People who use these substances recognize it's not just distorted information, but also important information that can be manifested in the visual expressive system in the same way that symbolization processes are manifested in dreams. We should understand the psychedelic hallucinations as really being a external technology that enhances visual thinking processes. This has been discussed as a presentational symbolism, a pre-verbal symbolism that has a very rich information source expressed in the notion that a picture is worth 1,000 words. An image can be very richly embedded with all kinds of information for us to articulate. So the overnight ceremonies and the visions engage this intrinsic symbolic meaning-making system that provides an image-based metacognitive system for understanding problems and how to resolve them. Sexual abstinence provides inhibitory control. I find it very significant that spiritual traditions around the world emphasize the importance of sexual abstinence to the point it becomes a requirement for some religious practitioners. The abstinence has some very important effects on the way in which our body responds overall. The abstinence reduces emotional discharges, particularly the orgasm and the related autonomic shifts. And what this does is reduce the rebound effects from the orgasm that stimulates to a high level of parasympathetic and sympathetic nervous system activity, and then a collapse that can go to any number of different reset points. What abstinence promotes is a sustained, stable regulation of the balance in the autonomic nervous system. And across time, it increases autonomic flexibility by increasing the responses in the parasympathetic nervous system and reducing the responses in the sympathetic nervous system. So it allows for a more structured affective emergence, enhancing the parasympathetic nervous system's revelation of these intrinsic emotional dynamics and reducing the sympathetic nervous system's response to previous trauma. So you get more coherent emotional processing, a more non-reactive kind of engagement with information that allows a more intentional and integrated dynamic to emerge. So briefly, we can optimize psychedelic healing today by adapting to the evolved psychology of ritual set and setting. I have proposed this idea almost 20 years ago in Shamanic Guidelines for Psychedelic Medicine, where I emphasized the idea that shamanic practice is found in pre-modern societies around the world had a set of procedures for dealing with ritual healing that will enable us to more effectively deal with the dynamics of our innate ritual capacities for endogenous healing responses. So what about our current adaptations and what about the future? Thus far, we've seemed to be more interested in what psychedelics did for us in the past as compared to what they can do for us in the future. But in this article, Psychedelics and the Future Evolution of Humanity, I propose that well-organized and responsible use of psychedelics can provide an important set of tools for future human adaptations as well. Can we shape our own evolution? Well, yes, but within certain limits. Basically, past evolutionary mechanisms limit future possibilities. Can we evolve the capacity to fly? Yes, but not by evolving our bodies, only by evolving our minds to the level that we can learn how to build machines to fly. So what this says is that we have to evolve within what has been our prior evolutionary dynamics. And the primary forces in human evolution, the brain, ultra sociology, and cultural niche construction are three areas that psychedelics have dramatic impacts upon. Neuroplasticity, neural regeneration of the brain, enhancing our capacity for sociality, and enhancing our capacity for creative thinking, which is, in a sense, construction of new cultural niches. So psychedelic instrumentalization can help us engage in processes of neural reuse, where neuroplasticity increases the capacity to rewire the brain. We also have the possibilities of psychedelic augmentation, augmentation, and psychedelic social advances through interpersonal symbiosis facilitated by extroversion, openness, and prosociality. Moral augmentation has been argued as well. The reduction of ethnocentrism and enhanced altruism might be primary mechanisms, and the engaging in culture and group level symbiosis. Traditional uses focused on the group bonding rituals, group ritual integration, and even the resolution of intergroup conflict. Can we engage these in our future through the use of psychedelics? Theoretically, they should be great tools. These haven't really been tried yet. So the future uses suggest that psychedelics can enhance our potential for change. They produce rare mystical experiences that have profound effects upon individuals and cultures, and they enhance neuroplasticity, sociality, even altruism. The possibility of transnationalism and universalism, where we have identities that go beyond our own ego identity, our cultural identities, our in-group, out-group dynamics, certainly is one of the most important areas in which humanity might be able to figure out how to use the psychedelics. And this may be well underway. Religious inventions. Psychedelic Christianity has taken off. There are more than 100 psychedelic churches, largely psilocybin churches, that have been established in the United States within the last decade or so. So people are starting to explore how it is that these psychedelics can reinvigorate our religious traditions. So how to best use psychedelics? As entheogens? Well, perhaps so. I think one of the things that we have to consider is the very powerful evidence that the most significant healing through the use of psychedelics happens with people that have their own spiritual mystical experiences. So what this suggests is that the clinical paradigm is not necessarily the best approach to take. I would start with the notion that the clinical paradigm, 2 psychiatrists and 1 patient, needs to be replaced with group therapy. The 8 in the morning till 5 in the evening psychedelic studies need to be replaced with the traditional ritual dynamic of 8 in the evening till 6 in the morning. And how do we best do this? I think we need to empower traditional entheogenic practices as the best practices for using entheogens. What for centuries was derided as the devil's tools of hallucinogens, of dangerous drugs, needs to be reconceptualized as the tools that humanity has long discovered in order to be able to best use these substances in the interest of psychedelic and personal and interpersonal change, and that the psychedelic use within the context of the traditional entheogenic practices, both in terms of their principles and in terms of their practitioners, ought to be the avenue forward for being able to engage with these substances. So one of the ways that we can best do this is to recognize these substances as cultural heritages, to empower the traditional entheogenic healers with a national recognition of the importance of their traditions, and find ways to elevate their knowledge, their traditions, their practices into not only community resources, but ultimately national resources, perhaps even international resources. Peru is an outstanding example of this movement towards a new way of dealing with what were once the tools of the devils, the plants of the gods, and now perhaps some of the best hope that we have for a psychiatric and medical renaissance, using the psychedelics as tools to help people heal and to do so in a way that will reduce their need for the use of pharmaceuticals and drugs that aren't as adaptive. Thank you.